Life has its challenges, and of course, the challenges cannot always be predicted. We also find new challenges as we solve one thing, something else comes up. We live longer now, but that also means we face new challenges as we get older. And sometimes lightning strikes out of nowhere. It doesn't matter how old you are. Sometimes this lightning is equal opportunity. Sometimes that lightning strikes one person at a time. It used to be the case that religions assumed and religious people assumed that if you were hit by something, you must have done something to deserve it, because they'd rather live in a world where everything makes sense than a world where things happen randomly. As time has gone on, as people came to more humanistic approaches to life, they realized that we are not the center of the universe, either humanity as a whole or you as a person. And it doesn't have to be the case that the cosmos planned for you to get sick. We don't have to add guilt to the fear and the pain and the challenges that we face facing illness and especially facing cancer. Now, for far too long, certain cancers got more attention than other cancers. And it's a testament to the power of advocacy and will and courage that now we see comparable attention paid to the cancers that need treatment. The challenge is, of course, that the emotional side of facing cancer still requires support and work. And that's where an organization like Sharsheret is vitally important. Sharsheret was started to create a sense of community, to provide support to people who need it, to educate the population, to encourage better outcomes, and to draw on the science that exists. After all, if it's not a cosmic curse to face cancer, but rather the happenstance of genes and circumstance and your experience, well, that's where human response comes in. Prayer doesn't hurt, but action helps. And that's why we focus on healing and on supporting the human spirit. After all, we know that positive attitude can lead to positive outcome. It's very special tonight that we are welcoming Jenny Stein here. She has a lot of letters after her name, which shows that she knows what she's talking about. She is the Midwest Regional Director of Sharsheret, overseeing outreach, education, partnership development, and some fundraising. Before joining Sharsheret in May of 2024, she worked as a nurse for over 15 years in the Chicagoland area. And so I am very pleased, and we should be honored to welcome Jenny Stein to talk to us about the work that Sharsheret does. And then we'll have plenty of time to ask questions and find out more about the work that the organization does.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for inviting me tonight. I'm just going to share my screen. Um, so tonight I'm just going to have a conversation, and because it's a nice intimate group, feel free to like ask questions, or hold them till afterwards, like Rabbi Cholam said, and we can, talk about them afterwards. But I'm really here just to let you know about Sharsheret, but also to let you know about cancer risks in general and how you can advocate for your health, your family's health, and it can really help to save lives. So if you're not familiar, Sharsheret is an organization. We were founded 23 years ago out in New Jersey by a young woman who was diagnosed with breast cancer when she was 28. And she was trying to find other young women who were in a similar situation, and she couldn't really find anything. A friend of a friend connected her to somebody who was on their own cancer journey a couple months ahead of her, and they started to talk talk a little bit, and then it was like they were talking every day, and they realized the impact of having a peer supporter. And that's really where we got founded. Since then, we have grown. We have 5 regional offices throughout the US. We opened up an office in Israel in May. I'll talk a little bit more about our services, but we've grown substantially, but still do the peer support as well. And really, our goal is to ensure that that nobody feels alone when they're going through cancer. And as some of you unfortunately might, have experienced or know through loved ones and friends, that even when you're surrounded by people, you can still feel alone. So we're there to really help, support that person where they are at. We offer that personalized support because we recognize that everyone has a different cancer journey. And so we want to, help the person where they are at. And we really focus on breast cancer and ovarian cancer, as well as people who are at high risk for cancers. With that being said, we don't discriminate. If somebody, calls us and they have a different type of cancer, we of course will help support them. And although we're a Jewish organization, we don't discriminate as well based on somebody's religion, culture, background, age. We're really there to help support anyone. About 20 to 30% of the people we support are not Jewish. So I just want to kind of start with some basics, which you guys are probably aware of. This was just here in the US. Sorry, I didn't know we'd have somebody from Nigeria on the call. I would have done some digging to see what the cancer incidence is out there. But so unfortunately, as you see here, breast cancer is one of the most common cancers. We see about half of the cancers of new cancers that will be diagnosed in 2024 will be breast cancer. Um, and so, similar to what the rabbi just talked about, like there are certain cancers, we see this with breast cancer, right? There's a lot of research in breast cancers, there's a lot of media attention on breast cancers. But it does also help with other cancers. My dad actually had pancreatic cancer and passed away about 16 years ago. And at first I was angry at the breast cancer movement because they got so much attention, but they really have helped to propel research for a vast majority of cancers, and have helped to, find treatments for other cancers as well. Um, but as you guys might know, with breast cancer, the median age that people that are diagnosed is about 62, although we are starting to hear, or there is more of an incidence of people under 50 being diagnosed. Um, Among women or, people who were assigned female at birth, 30% of new cancers among that specific group are breast cancer each year. So it is a significant amount. With ovarian cancer, it is more rare. The median age is around 63 as well. It's more common in white women than in women of color. But we have seen a decrease in the incidence of ovarian cancer over the years. So, what we talk about a lot of the education we do is about the risk, knowing your risk for cancer. Again, our specialty is in breast and ovarian cancer, but it really speaks for any cancer. So as you may know, 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed, or people who are assigned female at birth will be diagnosed with breast cancer in their life. And 1 in 72 women or female assigned at birth will be diagnosed with ovarian cancer in their life. We also know that 1 in 1,000 men or male assigned or assigned male at birth will also be diagnosed with breast cancer. So this is just in the general population. We know for screening for breast cancer, we have good screening techniques here. We do mammograms starting at 40. Um, they say now the recommendations are that after 75, women don't necessarily need mammograms because the benefit versus risks of that type of imaging, they're not it's insufficient, that like balance of the effects of the mammogram versus the results of it. But I do know somebody, one of our volunteers, actually, she's 88. She's a breast cancer survivor. And she pushed with her doctors. She advocated for her doctors to still do mammograms because she's like, she knew for herself, psychologically, she didn't want to find out, in a few years, right, that there was something growing in her body. So, make sure, again, importance of advocating for yourself. Unfortunately, with ovarian cancer, we don't really have any good screening options right now. And so, as you guys might be familiar, so this, I should say, this is in the general population, the cancer risks. Everybody has something called the BRCA gene, or BRCA, you might have heard of it referred to as. We all have two copies of those. One's from our mother's side, one's from the father. And these genes are really important because they help suppress any type of growth of, abnormal cells within our breast, gynecological, pancreatic growth, etc. So you likely have heard of these because, right, when you have a mutation in this, it puts you more at risk for breast cancer or ovarian cancer. And what makes this a particularly Jewish issue is that 1 in 40 Ashkenazi Jews, again, I'm sorry, I don't have the statistics, outside of the Ashkenazi Jewish community, they think there is some within the Sephardi community, but 1 in 40 people, men and women in the Ashkenazi Jewish community will be a carrier of the BRCA1 or 2 mutation, which puts them at risk for cancer. In the general population, the risk is 1 in 400. So we are 10 times more likely to carry a genetic mutation. And then with the BRCA1 and 2 mutations, this is how you can see the difference between general population risk for cancer versus if you have the mutation. So it doesn't mean if you have the mutation, you're 100% gonna develop cancer, but as you can see on this slide, it significantly increases your risk. So there are a lot of options out there now, through technology, thankfully, for people who do have the BRCA mutations to not just advocate for their health, but also, take precautions. There's additional screening that can be done. So as you guys know, mammograms are used for screening right now. If you are at high risk, if you have the BRCA mutation or strong family history, they do MRIs every 6 months that alternate with mammograms because the MRIs are able to pick up cancer earlier. And then that begs the question, why aren't we all getting MRIs? And that's because there's a lot of false positives, meaning the MRI will pick something up. The patient has to go through a biopsy. There can be a lot of psychological trauma. And then it turns out to be benign or not cancerous. So right now, MRIs are just for people at high risk. Obviously, healthy living, we know exercising, eating well, not smoking, can help just try to avoid any type of cancers. Chemo prevention, like what Tamar had mentioned. So some people who are diagnosed with breast or ovarian cancer will be on chemo prevention, typically something called like tamoxifen or letrozole. There's a lot of different ones that are like anti-hormonal medications. But even somebody who's at risk, there might be a reason that their doctor wants them to start that as well. So again, just try to further decrease that risk. There are also prophylactic surgeries. So some women decide to have prophylactic bilateral mastectomies where they remove all their breast tissue. Women who are at risk for ovarian cancer may decide to have their ovaries and fallopian tubes removed. And so there's a lot of different options there as well. And then there's this new technology, or relatively new, is this pre-implantation genetic testing. I just said testing, sorry. And so essentially, I'm not sure, are you guys familiar with what pre-implantation genetic testing is? Okay, so this is amazing technology. I have no clue how it works, even though I was a nurse for many years, for 20 plus years. So they use the technology of in vitro fertilization. And so what they can do is a woman will, they'll take the egg, they'll take the sperm, they'll make an embryo. There's technology now that they can look at the embryos and be able to decipher certain mutations. So if somebody knows that they have a BRCA1 or 2 mutation, as well as other mutations, this is what, yeah, as well as other mutations and for other diseases, they can then look under a microscope and see which embryos look like they or have the mutation versus don't. And then the family can decide, in terms of family planning, that they want to implant an embryo that does not carry the mutation. So it's a way to kind of stop the mutation from being carried on from generation to generation. There are, of course, unfortunately, there are other genetic mutations that can cause or put somebody at increased risk for cancer. And so these are just some of them here. And so one of the things we really talk about is knowing your family history. And it's not just about breast or ovarian cancer, but as you see on this slide, there's multiple other cancers: colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, um, melanomas, et cetera. So it's really important to know your family history. And if you know a family history that you haven't already shared with your family, we would recommend sharing it with them because it can truly save their lives. Because having that information and going to their doctor may recommend, seeing a genetic counselor to talk through if they should get testing or not. So um, and what the genetic counselor will do is they kind of go through the family history, right? And I don't know if some of you guys are familiar with this or not. But essentially, if you start at the top, generation one, the parents. So the gray box is saying that that is a male who had the BRCA mutation. The female, which is the circle, did not. So they have children, and there's a 50% chance that each child will get the mutation from the father in this case. So you see in that generation two of the three kids had carried the BRCA mutation. The line through the box means that they have unfortunately passed. And then you see how in that third generation, the female had the BRCA mutation and then unfortunately got passed on to two of her children as well. So this is why it's really important to know your family history. They can do a variety of different genetic testing based on whatever the family history is. I did want to note here that a lot of times too, when we talk about family history, particularly within the Jewish community, a lot of times we may not know all of our family history if people were in Eastern Europe, and unfortunately, their families were in the Holocaust and didn't survive. We also know that a lot of times, men and women can carry the BRCA1 or 2 mutation. And when a male is carrying it, does increase their risk of cancer, but it's significantly, there's still an increased risk for cancer and an increased risk for breast cancer, but it's significantly less than women. So when a male has the gene, they might not actually get cancer, right? They might, because the risk it's higher than the general population, but it's still fairly low. And so sometimes you might not see the cancer in every generation. I remember when my dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, he was also treated at Kellogg. Well, at the time it was just Glenbrook, but part of Kellogg that they were looking for trends. How many people in your family have had breast cancer? How many people have colon cancer? How many people have this cancer? And so it's important to know those because they can test for different genes.
When I was 43 years old, my two girls were very young at the time. I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and as it turned out, I tested positive for the BRCA gene mutation. I remember the bathroom just spinning around me, and my world was crashing in on me.
When I was about 18 years old, my parents sat me down and told me and my sister that my mom carried the BRCA mutation and that there was a 50-50 chance that we carried it as well. I got tested right after Daniel and I got engaged, and it came out that I actually tested positive for a BRCA mutation.
With knowledge comes power, but with that positive gene mutation came a whole lot of guilt that I unknowingly passed it on to her.
I always knew about Charcheret from my mom's involvement, and it was after I tested positive that I really learned about all the resources and offerings that Charcheret had and how I could potentially utilize that for my path down the road. During the pandemic, my doctor postponed my annual visit, and not having that set time to see my doctor scared me. I wanted to take matters into my own hands and move forward with the prophylactic mastectomy.
Lana and I were really proud of the kids after a little bit more than 1 year of marriage that they made this monumental decision. They did it with a lot of research and courage. and they handled it with such grace.
I knew my first call had to be Sharsheret. I was put in touch with a social worker, and she then put me in touch with other women across the US and Israel who had my doctor so I could talk to them about their experience.
Sharsheret was so helpful to me as a caregiver to be a sounding board, to be a source of support, and to be able to advise on best practices. More than anything, though, there are people who can relate to the experience you're going through, both as patient and as caregiver. Sydney and I had already known about IVF, but through reading Sharsheret materials, we learned about PGTM, which gave us the possibility of eliminating the BRCA mutation from our bloodline.
IVF with PGTM is a combination of two wonderful technologies that we've been blessed with in our generation. We take in vitro fertilization and we compound it with testing the embryo. It affords us the ability to differentiate between embryos that might be affected with a genetic disease and those embryos that are normal or unaffected.
It was needles and doctor's appointments every morning and follow-ups and expensive medication. It wasn't an easy process on my body at all. And on top of that, I decided to undergo this in between my prophylactic mastectomy and my reconstructive surgery. So we were very fortunate. And out of the 8 viable embryos that were sent off to testing, 4 of them were negative. After healing from my reconstructive surgery, we decided to transfer an embryo, and unfortunately, it did not result in a positive pregnancy.
Sydney and Daniel never gave up. They never quit believing. Despite everything surrounding them and all the other procedures that they had to do, they persevered, and then at their second transfer, they were blessed with success. A BRCA negative, healthy embryo and child.
Knowing when I look at her that she doesn't have the BRCA mutation, it lights up my world. My heart is living outside of my body at this point. I can't put it into words, the joy that I feel when I look at her.
It happens to be exactly almost to the day my 20th year of being diagnosed and being cancer-free. How lucky am I? But most importantly, Sharsheret gave me, my granddaughter Maya, the opportunity to be born without the BRCA gene mutation. And that is such a gift and a true blessing.
As we embark on our journey for both Sydney's surgeries as well as IVF and PGT, we decided to really deepen our involvement in Sharsheret. The value that Sharsheret brings and the importance that Sharsheret has within our community is absolutely impossible to overstate. I decided to get more and more involved and ultimately join the board of Sharsheret to contribute in any small way that I can to this incredible mission. Looking back at this process, the feeling I could say I feel more than anything else is blessed. Blessed we live at a time in the world where modern medicine has made both the surgeries as well as IVF and PGT possible. Blessed that we have an unbelievable support system in our families and friends. Blessed that we have each other, and blessed that Sharsheret has been there with us every step of the journey.
All right. So just kind of wanted to share, like I said, that story. And we can talk more about it. And I did see your question in the chat, and so I'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, so I should have stated this earlier when I first started, just in terms of the support services that Sharsheret has. So as you heard in the video, we offer, I don't know how to make this bigger, so we're just going to go with it how it is. We have social workers on staff that can connect with people. We also have genetic counselors on staff, and everything is free of charge. So we don't ask someone's insurance information, anything like that. And we're just here to help support people. And again, meeting them where they're at. So we have different types of programs to help with that. So we have the Peer Support Network, which is really where the organization founded and connecting people to somebody else who's in a similar situation. We have this program called Best Face Forward, which allows us to provide paraben-free makeup to women who are going through cancer treatment, It provides them with some, I think there's like an eyebrow pencil in there as well. Just so people can feel good inside and out. A lot of times when people are going through chemotherapy, there are obviously side effects that are visible, right? People lose their hair, they lose their eyebrows. And so when people look at themselves in the mirror, they can have a really hard time with that. And so we just want to be able to help support them through that difficult time. We have something called a busy box. If somebody calls and they have young children, usually like less than 12 years of age, 10 years of age, we try to send them toys for their children and customize them towards the toys they like. So if they like Spider-Man, if they like Mickey Mouse, we have a whole closet full of donated new toys that we'll send to the families. So their kids have something to do while their loved one is resting, or maybe, they're at treatment. And then we also include in there information on how to talk to kids about cancer. We have an Embrace program, which is really meant for our callers that have metastatic or advanced cancer. We have Genetics for Life, which is essentially working with our genetic counselor. So we don't actually offer genetic testing. We do refer you to some places where you can do a spit test for genetic counseling or genetic testing. But you can talk to our genetic counselor and she can talk, about, what she thinks you should be tested for. We actually had a situation a couple months ago where somebody called, they were from a religious Jewish community or family, and she had like 10 brothers and sisters, and she found out that she was BRCA positive, and she didn't know how to tell her family. And so our genetic counselor was able to work with her and, have a Zoom meeting with the family and really lead that conversation. Our family focus program is really to help caregivers, and make sure that they're supported as well. Our Thriving Again is for people who have completed treatment, but are still obviously dealing with cancer, whether it's, they're taking, like Tamar said, a chemo prevention, or, maybe they're done with treatment, but obviously cancer has such an impact on your life. And so just being able to connect with other people. And then we offer a financial assistance program. So that's this Best Face Forward 2.0 program. So we're fortunate enough to be able to provide financial assistance to people for human hair wigs, for tattooing, for like eyebrow tattooing, and some women who have their breasts removed would like to have nipple and areolas if the whole breast was removed or if the nipple was affected by the cancer. So we can help with the cost for that. And then also there's something called cold capping, which I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with. You essentially, okay, it looks like I'm getting some head nods, but you more or less put like this cap on your head that's like an ice pack. And the thought is because chemotherapy kills your hair follicles, if you ice it, that it won't. And for some people, it does work. So we help with that. We also offer a lot of online support. So we have webinars that we run throughout the year. Our next one will be January 6th. I'm actually helping to moderate it. There was the largest breast cancer conference was just in San Antonio. It's called the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium. So we will be hosting, I will have two experts in breast cancer speaking about, what were the latest, greatest things coming out. But as you see, even on the screen, we do a lot of different webinars. It's not just scientific information coming out, but we do a lot of like music and movement. We have a yoga one, we do cooking classes. And then we record all of our webinars as well. So if somebody can't make it, they can always look at it later. And then we have Facebook groups. And the Facebook groups are really specific to one community. So as you see, we have a caregiver support group. We have, a support community where there's people who are diagnosed, newly diagnosed, or, somewhere in their cancer journey. Embraces are our callers who have metastatic or advanced disease, and then people who are at high risk or hereditary cancers. So this is just if you want more information. I'm happy to share these slides with Rabbi Cholam, and then he can share them with you guys as well. But this QR code will lead you to our page on the pre-implantation genetic testing to get more information. And then This is just some general information how to contact the Midwest office or to contact me. And yeah, I will answer questions. I see. Yeah. So Johnson asked, that with his aunts, that, there's always a chance that they would have to end their relationship because they both had, a gene, making that they're a risk for sickle cell. And so as the more genetic information becomes more now, more out there and people are know about it, will it decrease the number of marriages and childbirth? So that's a really great question. So there are two different types of genetic mutations or inherited genes. So the BRCA1 or 2 mutation, the cancer ones are are dominant, meaning that if one of your parents has the mutation, there's a 50% chance that one of their kids will get it. With sickle cell and like Tay-Sachs, actually, yes, I believe sickle cell is recessive. It's a recessive gene, so both parents have to be a carrier. So essentially, for recessive genes, there's a 25% chance that a child could have the disorder. And unfortunately, with the recessive mutations, it's not a risk that you'll have it. You have that condition. So here in America, we do screening for recessive mutations. I don't know if that's something that they do in Nigeria, but we do have here there's specific like Jewish panels. So when people get married, or before they get married, sometimes their rabbis or their physicians or their parents will recommend that they get it done. So that again, you could do it's not the pre I guess at some point they'll probably use a pre-genetic implantation for the same thing to kind of weed that out, but it's just for you to know your risk. Now, in very religious communities, they do all this testing before people even start dating. So if they see that someone's even a carrier, they wouldn't match them.
So, Jenny, it might be interesting to answer the second half of the question about what impact you think this will have
Oh,
on either partnerships or on people having children
yes.
going forward.
So I think it depends. Like I think here in the US, the birth rate among married couples has significantly gone down from what it used to be for a variety of factors. I think with the genetic mutations, I'm not sure that people won't get married from it. I think it's going to take some time though. Um, I think first of all, at least here, people don't necessarily talk about cancer. Like when my dad was diagnosed 16 years ago, like good family friend was like, poo, 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 don't say cancer. It's like, well, my dad has cancer. And so I think, yeah, so I think first being like more aware of it and knowing your own family history. So people are more cognizant of it. This PGT is relatively new, but also because with the cancer mutations, it's not a guarantee that you're going to get the disease. I'm not sure that it's a factor in terms of people not deciding to have kids. But obviously in the video that you saw, like for that family, it was very important for them to make sure that they were bringing somebody into this world that wouldn't have to go through what they went through. But for other people, they, are like, we're gonna roll with it. Like we might, for multiple reasons, right? Like it's not 100% they're going to get the disease. And it also might be, they don't believe in creating embryos and then not using the embryo. Um, so it's interesting. I don't know. I think as more PGT over the next like few years, like 10 years, we'll see if it's sorry, my kids are just joined. Yes. Oh, why lovely. Okay. I'm in a work meeting.
So, what I'll share is I don't have statistics, but I have anecdotes. That's what rabbis
Okay, perfect.
say.
Yes, please share. And if anybody else does, please share as well.
Right. So I did a, baby naming for a family once. They had gotten married, in their early 30s, and they did the Jewish genetic testing panel. And it turns out they were both carriers of Tay-Sachs disease in their family, which is also a recessive gene, but can lead to a very short and difficult life for a child. And so they decided and this is one of the issues with this genetic testing, they were able to afford doing IVF, which is a question of access and equity and so on. but they were able to do this, and so they saved some embryos, and sure enough, some of them were Tay-Sachs positive, and some of them were not. And so they were able to do one round of implantation. They got twin girls that came from that, and then a few years later, they had a boy. And the irony was that all three of their children were conceived at the same time, but two of them were 3 years older than the younger one because of when they were implanted and when they grew and were born. But that's a case where they were able to afford it and they could do the multiple rounds, and they had success with that process. You saw with this other family, they tried, it didn't work the first time, and then the second time it was able to work. Um, this is the haphazard nature of it. I think the factors behind fewer children being born, there's a lot of them. In some cases, certainly in parts of what we in the West call the developing world, uh, women being able to choose how many children they have is a sign of improvement in society and women's status, and it helps in all kinds of ways. And they're able to choose how many children they want to have instead of having more than they would want. And also in America, part of the decline in fertility is from age, because people are just getting married later. And if you get married later, your fertility is lower, and you know, and they might have fewer kids. I mean, I remember looking back at records of a humanistic Jewish congregation in Chicago from the early 80s. The typical family had three or four kids. And in our congregation, the typical family has one or two kids. And we occasionally get three. And once in a blue moon, we get a family with four. But it's very unusual, for our style of Jewish community and families. And that's a function of higher education, of family planning, of people getting married older, and simply, choosing the size of family they want. And they may not choose as large a family as before. So I don't know that genetic testing is necessarily decreasing that, but it could have a knock-on effect, like in this family in New Jersey, they only had so many embryos that they did, and maybe they would have chosen to try more if they didn't have the genetic condition. But this is again one of those cases, as I started with, there's positives and negatives. The positive is they could bring a child into the world without having the risk of that same cancer gene. They may bring fewer children into the world as a result of that, but they would rather have fewer healthier children than more at-risk children. I actually had a question for Jenny.
Yeah. No, thank you. You explained that very well. If you could type that up for me and send it to me, so if I get asked in another
I'll send
group,
you the
I could
link for the
say,
recording and you can get the
per
transcript.
Rabbi Cholam.
Right. So my question for you is, why not just test everybody? Why not just take all the people in this population that's a 1 in 40 chance of having it? Just, I mean, the genetic test probably isn't that expensive and whatever. Why not just test everybody? But I can imagine a few reasons why people might choose not to test. Maybe they're afraid of finding out. Some people don't want to know, even if it's bad news. Um, some of it might be fear of insurance issues, because if it's on your record that you've tested positive for this, are they going to stick you when you're applying for insurance or deny you coverage if something happens? So I'm just curious for your thoughts on that question of to test or not to test. What inhibits people from testing, or why we just don't do it as an automatic thing?
Yeah, so it's very interesting you bring that up because I was in grad school at Brandeis at the Hornstein Program for Jewish Professional Leadership about 15 years ago, and that's what I did my capstone project on. Like, should we test everybody? Should we not? What should we do? Um, and so there's multiple reasons. So some of which you mentioned, right? Like some people just don't want to know. Like they don't want to know because they don't for various reasons, right? Psychologically, maybe they don't have to deal with it, or maybe it's like you're just waiting then, right? For some people, like I'm like that. If I know I have something and there's like a risk, it's like, okay, when's it gonna hit? When's it gonna hit? Um, there's also this fear. I mean, it's more you more see it in like the religious Jewish community of like if you know somebody has familial trait, a familial disease, like they're not marriage material type of thing. I grew up Reform here in Northbrook, and my grandma had type 1 diabetes. And I remember in high school, I was dating somebody, And I made some comment that my grandma had diabetes and my grandpa was pissed. You don't tell people they're not going to want to marry you. I'm like, what are you talking about? But that was like a fear for him that, if you're not unwell, but do you guys know what I mean? There's like, yeah.
Time
Okay.
bomb.
Yeah. Um, and then so with insurance, so I strongly, well, regarding genetic testing, I strongly feel that before somebody decides to get genetic testing, they should understand what the results could mean and what options there are. My friend actually, her parents gave her like a 23andMe genetic test. It's like a Hanukkah gift more than a few years ago, but she did it and she got the results back and she like goes to look it up online to see, where is she from? And it tells her that she has a BRCA1 or 2 mutation. And she's like, well, what do I do now? Um, and so I strongly believe that it's important to know what the options are because if you don't know what you would do with it or um, if you get tested because okay, I would do increased screening, I would, have prophylactic surgery. Okay, but if you're like, I'm not going to do anything with the information, I don't know if you would want to go through with it, right? Again, it's just like that psychological. Um, so yeah. And then there was something else I was going to say. Yeah, so I think just like knowing what your options are and what it could mean as well is really important. And because I think there's a lot of fear about if somebody, doesn't even I think even more so with the not as the cancers that aren't as common. So we know with breast cancer that your risk can increase, 60 to 85% if you have the BRCA1 mutation, but it can also increase your risk of pancreatic cancer, which there's no good way to screen for. Um, but it's a significantly smaller risk. I'd have to look back at my notes to see the exact. But then again, it's just like instilling that fear in the
I wonder how
community.
much of it
So,
is also sort of a holdover of magical thinking. The
yes,
evil eye and the if I say it out loud, it's going to come true. The poo 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 or the whispering cancer. You know,
right.
and on some level, it's this belief that if we just think it, it will happen. Um,
Yes.
Again, we're a congregation that doesn't focus on prayer as a solution to issues because
Yeah.
we don't think that just thinking causes things to happen. But you get that sense, and so maybe if I, find out the facts about this, my risk, then it's going to happen if I even say anything about it. Um, and that isn't
Yeah.
how the world works. Nobody's listening to then
Correct.
act on what you thought. But
Correct.
that old holdover still carries through.
Yeah. And then just going back to the insurance thing. So there are insurance implications. So that's why it's really important also to talk to a genetic counselor ahead of time because they'll tell you this, but at least so I'm telling you this now. Make sure you have life insurance before you get any type of genetic testing. Because if you don't have life insurance, you do testing and a mutation or something comes back, it's going to be difficult to get life. You'll be able to get life insurance, it'll just be much more expensive. So that's always a good thing. And then right now, in terms of healthcare insurance, in the current state, the current federal law, you they can't, what's the word I'm looking for?
Deny.
It, yeah, they can't deny coverage for you for, they would consider it like a quote unquote pre-existing condition, right? So you would still have to be treated, it doesn't matter. That could change at any point in time. So right now you would be safe. Like you'd still get the coverage, the regular coverage, because you're just in this general risk pool. But um, yeah, right now it's more the life insurance, making
Right.
sure you have that in place. Which I'll be honest, when my husband and I, yeah, when we did our recessive, for like the Tay-Sachs and all of that stuff before we had kids, um, we definitely, I don't think we had life insurance. Fortunately, ours came back negative. Because it's still expensive, life
Yeah.
insurance.
Yeah. I had one other question, but I didn't know if anyone else wanted to
Yeah.
have a comment or question.
Yeah, Kate.
I actually have two questions. I hope that's okay.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so first of all, as far as I know, don't have any Jewish genetic history. I'm the convert
Mhm.
in the group.
Okay.
Um, So as far as I know, I don't have any Jewish ancestry, but um and I don't have any children. So that's not a concern there, but I am adopted.
Yeah.
So I was curious what your feeling is on someone like me getting tested, and do you need to have that family history to be effectively genetically tested?
Those are great questions. So you don't need family history to get tested. There are various ways to get tested um, now. So you can do a spit test. So there's this organization called J Screen, and they screen for like 72 genes, I think, and they send you a tube at home. You spit into it. It's like $150. You could also talk to your doctor about it. They might be able to put in an order, but most of the time you have to see a genetic counselor first, who then could probably put in the order, but then that goes through insurance. So sometimes 150 to do the spit test is easier, it just kind of depends. Um, but right, so a lot of people don't necessarily know their biological family history. Um, so I think it's a decision. You can certainly, like I said, these spit tests, they're called like direct to consumer tests because they send it to your home. You can certainly do. It's not just the Jewish community as well that's affected by these mutations. Essentially, it's really any community that stayed together for generations. So there's a lot of like, way back in the day, um, a lot of different Eastern European groups stayed together. Like Italians, it's the same thing. But they there was inbreeding. And so with that came some genetic mutations over multiple generations, et cetera. So I think if you're curious about it, I definitely like you can call one of our genetic counselors and she could talk to you more about it. I mean, kind of explain to you like what, again, knowing if the results come back positive, what does that mean? And if they come back negative, what does that mean? So then you can make the decision that makes sense for you.
And actually, my second question, that actually was one question. My second question is, are there any other limits to genetic testing that haven't been discussed already? Like maybe even like limits in like, I don't know if they're called assays, if it's genetic testing, but like limits in the testing process itself and like, like even if you have a breast cancer mutation, you're not 100% certain to get breast cancer, like limitations like
Correct.
that maybe we should be discussing and thinking about as well.
Yeah, so that's another great question. So our genetic counselors could definitely speak more intelligently about that, but our technology is constantly changing. So the technology to be able to identify mutations on a gene, but also the scientific knowledge behind that of what mutations can cause certain cancers. That area has grown significantly over the past probably even 10 years, 15 years. Um, so yeah, I think it's just um yeah, and no test is perfect. So we know tons of people who have strong family history of breast cancer. They do genetic testing and they're negative. That doesn't mean that there's not some genetic component. It just means or environmental component. We just don't know what that is yet. And I think the other thing too is less than 10% of cancers are hereditary. So still, the majority of cancer diagnoses are happening sporadically, meaning they're happening randomly. There's no, gene mutation that's increasing somebody's risk to get it that they get it. Does that make sense? So, so yeah. Sorry, it's not a clear answer.
That's okay. Nothing about genetics is clear from what I
No, it
understand.
isn't. And then depending too on where you go to get it done, the testing is
Hmm.
different. Like I didn't realize this. I met with a
Right.
genetic counselor last week and she told me like the spit tests are just like your standard 72 panel or whatever, because those are the most common. But if you
Right.
meet with a genetic counselor and you talk to them about your own personal history, if you know your family's history, they could add on to those normal 72 with rare things that they're like, oh, because you had this or because you had this diagnosis or a family member had this diagnosis. So they have a lot more ability to customize it.
Right. I do want to add kind of anecdotally that one of my favorite quotes is just because it's inexplicted doesn't mean it's inexplicable. And so like
Wait,
there
just
are
because it say it again?
inexplicted, it's not a real word.
Oh, okay. I was like, what is that word? I've never heard of it
Yeah,
before.
just because it's inexplicted doesn't mean it's inexplicable. So like basically like just because we don't have an explanation doesn't mean we won't or that there isn't one.
Yeah.
And so much of just science in general is like that.
Yeah.
And kind of life, I guess. But like genetics seems to be a particular area where that covers a lot of things that that's
Hmm.
saying.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to add that you know like I get it. We're talking about really complex matters and our understanding is always evolving and like you know there's no guarantees of anything
Right.
and
Well,
that's
I think
both a
it
positive thing and not always a positive thing. So
yeah, well, I think it goes back to what the rabbi was saying too, that like we sometimes like we're looking for the reason for something, right? And so like I know like when somebody's diagnosed with cancer or any other disease, right? It's like, well, why did they get that? Oh, because they ate the wrong food, they're eating too much sugar, they're smoking, they're this and that. And sure, that might have contributed to it, but that's not the sole reason. And might not even be the reason at all that, they got that disease, but it's easier to put it on it's because of X that Y happened as opposed to like it's just sporadic because we can't understand that, right? Like why do good things happen to bad people, right? So because that's just life. It unfortunately, yeah.
Great.
Anybody else?
Well, Jenny, thank you. This was really wonderful.
Yeah, no
I
problem.
guess the last question I had that might be worth talking about a little bit. Sharsheret is focused specifically on women's cancer experience. Um, and I've heard and I've also experienced it in helping people deal with breast cancer and uterine cancer. Um, the psychological effects on a sense of womanhood or even a sense of
Mhm.
yourself in dealing with these particular cancers, having mastectomies and losing breasts or hysterectomies or losing your ovaries. This is a part of what makes you who you are, particularly for people who are younger who might not have had children yet, and are fearful that they may never have them with this kind of a circumstance. Um, how does Sharsheret try to address those particular needs of gender identity and sense of self that come out of these particular cancers?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So that's part of our Best Space Forward program, because we recognize, it's difficult for people, particularly women, right, to lose their hair, to lose their eyebrows. It's something for people who identify as feminine, right? It's very feminine and that's being taken away. Okay, yes, this is what I say. So going through treatment, but then we also have seen like over the last 9 months that I've been in this role, like I've met with some people who are just finishing up treatment, have been out of treatment for a couple of years, and even like they're still dealing with the effects of not seeing themselves as they used to, right? Whether there's scars, whether they decided like there's no breast tissue, whether, right, hormonally, they're not the same because their ovaries were removed. And so it's how do you still feel like you? A lot of people describe it as like they just don't feel like themselves. They look in the mirror and they don't recognize the person that's looking back at them. And so our social workers are there to really help with that. And then we can connect people to other resources if it's something that we don't have the expertise in. So we partner with a lot of different community organizations to be able to, connect people. We part of the Best Face Forward 2.0 program with um, the financial subsidies is to help women again if their eyebrows didn't grow back or they didn't grow back the way they wanted for them to look at have the ability to feel like they were prior to the chemotherapy. And yeah, we try to do webinars on that subject too. Body image is just a huge issue. And we're trying. I know like locally there's somebody in Skokie who wanted to start like a group of just people who like they finished treatment, but they're still just like dealing with the effects. And again, having that peer support where you're talking to someone who's been through the same thing. And can hopefully help guide you.
Yeah.